What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in true crime. We have 3 for you today. Only 2 have shown so far, but we are hoping the great Eric Bland will be here momentarily. Best guest today, you're looking at Joseph Preston Pete Strom, otherwise known as Pete Strom. He is a managing partner of the Strom Law Firm. He's been fighting for justice since 1984. He is a native of Columbia, South Carolina. Pete began his career by joining the 5th Judicial Circuit Solicitor's Office as an Assistant Solicitor. He was named United States Attorney for the District of South Carolina in 1993. At the time, he was appointed by Attorney General Janet Reno, and Pete back then was the youngest U.S. attorney in the country. He's named one of the top 10 criminal defense attorneys in the state of South Carolina and was also named as one of the top 100 trial lawyers for criminal defense by the National Trial Lawyers Association. And then you've all seen Tim Jansen before, the famed Tallahassee defense attorney. He's a partner in the firm that bears his name, Jansen and Davis. He's handled all kinds of complex civil, administrative, and criminal litigation. He also spent 5 years as a federal prosecutor. No one knows the Tallahassee legal community better than Tim, and we are waiting on Eric Bland. Guy got so much press and publicity over the last 6 weeks, he may be held up in the makeup room right now. I don't know. He's a super lawyer for as many years as you can count. He also happens to be representing the family of Gloria Satterfield. We are hoping that he will join us. In the meanwhile, though, we've got 2 of the very best right now. Quick reminder, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can follow us on all those. Twitter, we are at Podcast STS. You can also listen to us. If you missed the video portion, you can listen to us anywhere you listen to podcasts. And survivingthesurvivor.com is up and running, and we are getting a merch store there soon. And look who it is. The debonair Eric Bland has.
Hey, guys.
Hey, how are you?
Eric, how you doing?
Good. Hey, Tim. How you doing?
Good.
Thanks for hopping on, Eric. And by the way, congrats, Eric. I saw photos. You have a new it's a new day in South Carolina and a new office coming too, and it looked quite nice. So congratulations.
Appreciate it. Not as nice as Pete's, but it's a worthy contestant.
And right off the back here, Tony Stacks Sullivan, 3 talented lawyers will be on today. Mr. Strom, Mr. Bland, and Mr. Jansen. No truer words have ever been spoken. Let's start here. Eric, you're the one that was most heavily entwined in all this. It was a grueling 6 weeks. How are you doing the Monday after?
Kind of a little bit like a prize fight. You wake up 3 days later, you won, but you realize how many lumps you took. A little numb, a little worried about, what took place, where am I going with it kind of thing. You're just trying to synthesize it all and put it in perspective. It's definitely a better Monday than it would have been if there was a hung jury or a not guilty verdict. But yeah, it's a good day. It's a good day for justice. I think our system came out in South Carolina clean on the other side of the sewage pipe. Clearly, Judge Newman is America's judge at this point. And I think we look good as a state. We looked good for the town of Walterboro. There were no incidents. There wasn't any rioting or nobody got hurt. Everybody was respectful after the verdict. There was, Pete and I did a lot of press conferences locally and, press appearances. I just think we looked really good compared to what it could have looked like if it got ugly. And at the same time, I do want to say I speak Pete Strom's name. He made the call last week and said it was going to be a guilty verdict. I didn't expect it, but he called it right on the head.
And I got to add, so did Tim Jansen. Jansen said it would be a grueling 16 hours of deliberations, but it was under 3. Pete, you said that Judge Clifton Newman was signing autographs at the University of South Carolina women's basketball game. I don't know if you were there or not, but tell us about that and tell us what you're feeling like the Monday after.
Well, you know, I feel like, Eric, I mean, what a great day for South Carolina. There's been a lot of criticism locally about our judicial system. That happens from time to time. People are second guessing the way we select judges. And I think people of South Carolina have seen now that we have the best of the best here. So it's a good day for our state. Obviously, there's some need of some reform, but not the kind of wholesale reform I think some people were thinking about. You know, after the trial, you know, like what we all do, we start armchair quarterbacking this thing a little bit and thinking about, if it were our case, how would we have handled it differently? And of course, we've now got them, Tim and I, who do this kind of work, have the benefit of hindsight. But, you know, I always thought it was a mistake for Murdaugh to take the stand. I thought and continue to think that this case was about trying to get 1, 2, or 3 people to hang this jury up. It was about trying to find 1, 2, 3 people that felt obligated to the Murdaughs and something that maybe his dad or grandfather or great-grandfather had done for somebody in their family, cut somebody a break when they were a prosecutor, or some favor they may have done in the community. And how were you able to bring those people in line with what I thought would be a majority of a jury? And I think really the 3 things I would probably do different. One, obviously, I've said I wouldn't put him on the stand. I don't think I would have put up a case. I think the experts they had, you know, we're taught in law school, one side's got an expert, you get an expert for the other side. So you got competing experts. I think Kenley did such a good job as an expert, and the forensic pathologist from MUSC did such a good job that when they put up their engineer who said that, you know, the person who shot was 5'2" or 5'4", and engineeringly that's possible, because if it was everybody was stagnant, you could line that up that way. But this was a dynamic situation that was happening, and the jury, rural jury, they knew that was bullshit. Okay, they knew that you didn't have to be 5'2" to do this shot, and I think they wholesale discounted that guy. And then their forensic expert came in and said the shot came from the top of the head, and that was inconsistent with where all the shells were found. So, and then the last thing was John Metters. I mean, what a great job he did hammering the case down at the end. So, if you would have accepted the state's theory of how the case happened as far as the angles of the shots, and argued 2 shooters, not put Murdaugh on the stand, and they had some of the people on Today's show this morning, 3 of the jurors, and they all said they didn't expect Murdaugh would testify. So they were prepared for that. They would have gotten the charge that you can't hold that against him. So I wouldn't have put him up. I wouldn't have put up a case, and then that would have prohibited John Metters from doing that powerful closing. I would have done it like you would treat a case where you've got a client who's got a bad prior record. And again, I think that would have been their best shot, but that's all in hindsight. And, you know, it's easy for me to say that now, but that's what I've been thinking about today.
And that is a good encapsulation. Joanna Bell writes, here goes the battle of the hair on Best Guess, Best Hair. I absolutely love Tim Jansen, handsome, intelligent, and he loves dogs, followed by Rose C here. Thank you, Eric Bland, for posting this on Twitter. Thank you, Eric. I'm now subscribed here and looking forward to this and future discussions too. We'll miss Sarah, though, as I'm sure this will be a topic up her alley. Sarah Ford will be back. For those who didn't catch it, we did an episode about a woman named Ellen Greenberg, who is from Eric Bland's hometown, Philadelphia. She was stabbed 20 times, 10 to the back of her neck and back, and it was ruled a homicide. We were trying to help get justice for her parents, Josh and Sandy, who appeared on the show last night. If you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend it. Tim, to you, we spoke Saturday, but a little more time has passed. Your overall thoughts on the trial as a whole, and then we'll get to some of the stuff Pete just mentioned about these jurors who spoke on the Today Show.
Well, I think it was a mistake putting him on the stand, but I don't think they had an option. You know, many people think the defense has an option. It's really the client's decision. And a lot of times we give clients recommendations, guidance, and They don't take it. I wonder if Alec was worried about the money and was worried about maybe a retrial, not having these lawyers, whether he felt he had to go for broke, whether he thought that he could convince and get him not guilty. I think the lawyers are too smart to know that he was opening himself up to cross-examination. He was never believable. He was never going to be believable. And just getting up there with the whole paranoia about the dogs in the kennel was ridiculous, because it came that he was at the kennel. You could have had a couple jurors still saying, well, I'm not sure that's his voice. Maybe not. Maybe they could have held out. But once he admitted to it, he put himself at the scene of the crime. And the thing that I thought the rebuttal was great. But what I would have done, I would have said, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that's your child that was shot. He was killed. Wouldn't you still be laying there holding your son when the 911 people showed up? Wouldn't you have blood all over your body? But no, this guy had an alibi, clean clothes, and it defied common sense. It defied logic. And as a parent, anybody that has kids knows this was bullshit. And I think Griff and Pooch should have realized that and should have come up with another defense. But, sometimes you just have bad facts. And sometimes
they were definitely delivered a bowl of spaghetti, messy spaghetti.
I thought the closing, I thought he didn't believe in it. He had no conviction. He was just going through the motions. And I can tell you, a jury knows when you're going through the motions and convictions. And Pete can tell you that. When someone's reading off a card, there's no emotion there. There's no theatrics. A trial is nothing but a performance, a show. And he did not participate. The defense did.
One of the things that Pete talked about, which he and I always talk about, which is, knowing your soil. And the prosecution knew their soil. Dr. Kinsey, as Pete said, was a $100 an hour expert. That's all he was. And the defense had these $600-700 an hour experts that were very highly technical. And, we understand what works with our juries. And Dr. Kinsey wouldn't have played, obviously, well in Atlanta, or may not have played well in Washington, D.C. But you put him in a rural jury, and he talks about guns with jurors who understand guns and use guns and understand how dangerous they are. He made a connection. That's the whole thing. Either lawyers have to make a connection with the jury, or their witnesses have to make a connection. The government's witnesses made a connection with the jury. Whether you want to criticize these SLED witnesses or not, they were impressive in how they spoke. There was so many female witnesses from SLED who were law enforcement, who were credentialed, who were well-spoken, who were educated. And Harpootlian, when he crossed them, it looked so antiquated. It was like an antiquated lawyer cross-examining young, vibrant witnesses. And that stark contrast just didn't work. And Kinsey was a home run. I mean, the jurors wanted his autograph, literally, Joel, after the verdict. He was on the front lawn of the courthouse. We're all given interviews. We went from, Long Crime to Nancy Grace to yada, yada to Court TV. He was doing the same thing, and people were coming up, taking selfies with him, jurors, everything. It was crazy.
Eric, let me ask you this. You complimented Attorney General Alan Wilson as well as I did on his direct examination, but every question he asked was a leading question.
Yeah, I mean, it was fun.
So why didn't Dick or Jim object to that? I mean, every question he had written out. And I mean, Dick is a master at kidney punching young prosecutors who don't know how to ask questions. And he didn't do that here. I mean, the AG was asked leading question. He had a flow to it, and he didn't break that flow. Dick didn't break that flow.
I think Dick was tired. Mm-hmm. I think Dick was irritated. Not only probably at Alex tugging on the sleeves and beating him up with notes and probably answering to the family members, but he also was hurt that he couldn't do that closing. And there was a little bit of shrinkage of Dick, as you saw as the trial went on. And, you know, look, I said he's a 74-year-old guy. Nobody else could have done that at 74 years old. And, you know, his skill set really wasn't shown as bright as it could during the trial. But this is a young man's game. And I say it, lawyers should expire like milk. And I'm definitely in my fourth quarter, and I'm going to expire soon. It was not a trial for Dick. A 7-week trial is not a trial for Dick because he's an acquired taste. And if you don't taste him early and enjoy it, you'll spit him out. And that jury did not like Dick Harpootlian. You could tell it was palpable in that courtroom, Pete. And I know, you know, he was a friend of mine at one time. I know he's a good friend of yours. And, you know, you've dealt with him your whole career, both professionally and personally. But the defense was tired. They should have objected. There was objectionable material during the closing by Creighton Wooders, especially by Metters. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I heard one objection either way. Did I on any closing? Do you guys recall?
Pete, do you agree with that assessment of Dick Harpootlian? It was a little harsh. I appreciate what Eric is saying, and he might be right.
You know,
do you agree with that?
You know, I think I said this last time. Dick's specialty is finding the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit moment. He's good at listening and finding an opening and driving it home. And it just didn't happen in this case. And I thought he got off to a bad start. His papers weren't where he wanted them to be. You could tell the judge was a little put out with him. I think Dick probably sensed that. You know, my guess is Alec may have pulled Dick back a little bit and had Jim doing more direct. And I don't think, and I mean, just knowing Dick Harpootlian, I'm sure he was planning on doing the closing. And something changed at the end. And Jim ended up doing it. And you're right, Jim did not have the emotion. And Jim, you know, there are several methods to do a closing. One is throw everything up and see what, hopefully something sticks. Something you say resonates with one juror and they buy it, but you throw every single thing up there. And that's what Jim did, but it was not organized the way it should have been or it could have been. And, you know, I think he was criticized a good bit, but technically he did what he needed to do. The performance left a lot to be desired.
I have a question for Tim. Tim, in a closing, have you ever done what Jim did, which is make a speculation or a supposition when he said, you know, Paul was a little detective. And it's quite possible that Paul came upon his father's pills and then decided that he was going to do his own investigation and confront his drug dealers. And that he confronted the drug dealers and they didn't like it. And then they came back and they killed Paul and Maggie. Have you ever done that where it didn't make any sense? Because if you're going to confront drug dealers or a cartel and they come back, they're coming with their own guns. They're not coming to your house hoping that you're going to have guns that they could steal. Have you ever, as a defense attorney, speculated on what happened in a close?
Well, when I do this, when I do my opening, I make sure what I say in opening happens in the trial. So when I come back to the closing, I say, I told you this was going to happen. And then you build up confidence. The jury thinks, oh, God, he was right. He did this, this, and this. So I know what the evidence is going to come. So I tailor my defense to I know what's coming in. I would never speculate on something like that you couldn't prove, because then you lose credibility. Once you lose credibility, you might as well sit down because they're not going to believe anything you're saying. But if you show them, you told them, I told you this. I told you this was going to happen. I told you this witness is going to be sketchy. He was sketchy. See what I told you? This is where we are. You put the law in there, then you argue reasonable doubt. I don't think I would have gone that route because I think that nobody would have bought that a mob hit would come without guns or a cartel hit would come without guns. They don't do it. They wouldn't go on that property without a gun because they could be shot just going on that property. It's very isolated. So
yes,
unless they've been there before and it's dark and the dogs weren't barking, they would never be able to sell that story.
Yeah, unfortunately, my dog is barking. Lady Claymore writes, 11 p.m. in Scotland, and I'm watching from my cozy bed. Always a brilliant panel. Welcome to Scotland. We've got people from Ireland here as well. And Marie Hernandez, a friend of the show. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone to you. Pete, you alluded to it earlier. 3 of the jurors in the case did speak to the Today Show today. One of the first things they said is they do not believe that Alec Murdaugh should have taken the stand. Gwen Jenneret went on to say, no, I did not think he was crying. He turned it on and off. No, it wasn't genuine. We already know that he's a lawyer. That's what another juror said. He's able to be emotional with cases. He's able to be emotional with himself. I think we were able to read right through that. It sounds like it was an absolute unmitigated disaster that he testified in his own defense in this case.
Well, good God, they were out, what, an hour? And so if you've ever been around a courtroom, what you know is there's 2 bathrooms in the jury room. So when they went back in there, they spent the first 20 minutes all going to the bathroom. And they deliberated 40 minutes after this length of a trial. I mean, I think they wholesale rejected the defense side, his testimony, his experts, and what Tim just said. They lost credibility at some point, and I don't think they hashed through all the deep facts. I think they decided one side was lying to them.
Joel, in the artful words of the jury from the producers on Broadway, they just didn't find him guilty. They found him incredibly guilty.
Yeah,
Pete, when you're doing a closing, and Eric, you're doing a closing, you're standing there and you're talking and you move around. I move around a lot in the podium. And then when I see a juror turn their head, then I move. Then I know I got problems with that juror. When I got them nodding their head up and down, I know I'm good. But that one that's standing over there that's not looking, or I got to get their attention. And when they turn around or they turn away, you're done.
Look, my longest trial was 3 weeks, and Greg Harris and I did it. And we knew pretty much what the jury was going to do. They're not stupid. I mean, they're sitting there for 6 weeks. At least 10 have made up their mind. It's hard to not want to talk about every single fact. Look, as lawyers, it's very difficult for us to pick the 5 best and leave 15 on the table. We are cautious by nature. We don't just do something without thinking it out. So Jim wanted to bring in the whole kitchen sink. And as I said, Alex delivered a really messy plate of spaghetti that had watery sauce, and you couldn't contain it. And I have a lot of respect for Jim Griffin. Look, he took it to heart. He worked so hard on that case. And, as lawyers, we appreciate that kind of effort. The lay people could criticize Jim and say he didn't have emotion, but what he did at that trial was extraordinary. The research, the arguing, the preparing the crosses, and then listening to testimony and have to prepare your redirect. Dick is a field type of lawyer, like a golfer. You would say he's more like a Ben Crenshaw on the green. He's not a robot like a Nick Faldo. That's what Jim Griffin is, thinking out every swing, every move. Dick is more feel. And, I feel for Jim. I mean, the guy worked so hard, and he gave 110%. You can't say, Pete or Tim, that Jim did not give 110%. And they were tired. They admittedly were discouraged because they knew when Alex got on the stand that he shit all over himself. They knew it.
Yeah,
and
they knew it.
And the trial went to a referendum against Alex, Pete. That's what it went to. And
you notice they didn't object during his cross-examination, during Alex's cross-examination. I mean, you could objection, badgering the witness, objection, ask and answer. They didn't cut
help him up.
Yeah.
It's like they gave him rope. He took the rope and they said, okay, you want the rope? Now it's all you. Go row your boat.
Speaking of golf and Nick Faldo, congrats to Tim Jansen, who left his golf tournament that he won early to be here on STS. We appreciate it. Adam's exploits, right?
I had some ringers.
Yeah. So Eric, what's going to happen with the financial crimes?
I talked to Creighton immediately after the verdict the next day, after the sentence, excuse me. And he said, we're scheduling the Satterfield case for trial. We're going to ask for a hearing to schedule it. Probably within the next 90 days, they're going to try the Satterfield case. And I think it's smart. I think you put your foot on Alex's throat. You forced Dick and Jim's hand on whether they're going to stay involved. Sure, they're going to file the notice of appeal within 10 days. But whether they want to stay for all the party on these financial cases, because you heard Judge Newman say, I am presiding judge over these other 99 cases, and we're going to schedule them immediately. I think they're not going to take the risk that they're only going to want one conviction on this murder case. I think they're going to, nail them on the Satterfield case, 2-day case at the most, and then just keep loading them up so that he can't get out of the mousetrap. I was on Thursday night with Dershowitz on one of the competing networks, and he said that ordinarily, Tim and Pete, 5% of the cases, these type of murder defendants get a reversal. But if you testify, it's less than 0.5% that get reversed, because the appellate court says, well, even though there may have been some evidentiary errors, the harmless error rule says that the jury could have looked at the defendant's testimony on its own.
Credibility
That's
alone.
why we convicted you based on the credibility.
That's
I
right.
saw that Eric Bland tweet.
right.
If you missed that just now, he tweeted out, Eric Bland, only in South Carolina, only 5% of cases get turned over on appeal. And where the defendant took the stand, it is less than 1%. And those who, if you don't know, Eric Bland is the attorney for Gloria Satterfield's family. So, Eric, you say this would be a 2-day. By the way, Creighton Waters is a pretty badass guitar player on top of everything else.
Yeah.
Saw him.
Eric, are they going to try to enhance him with subsequent convictions?
I think so. I think that I just don't see a way out of the mousetrap. Do you, Tim? Do you, the mousetrap that he's now in? Does Dick and Jim stick around? What's the defense if he got up on the stand under oath in this trial and said, I am guilty of these financial crimes? Yes, the state still has to go through. There's no summary judgment in criminal cases like there is in a civil case where you can use a judicial admission like that. But you can use it because he waived his fifth. But they're going to have to impanel each jury and prove their government's case. Aren't they going to have to do that?
Yeah, but are they going to try to convict him on one, then convict him on a second, and then go for life without parole?
Yeah, and you've already expressed your reservation about that you feel is unfair and potentially can be attacked as a constitutional violation.
Well, it's not that beyond that. Do we want to start putting every fraud defendant in jail for life? Because anybody who steals any amount of money, there are multiple offenses.
Right.
I don't care. There multiple breach of trust. So is the AG going to set the precedent that every time somebody commits a breach of trust or some type of grand larceny, there's going to be 3 of them? If there's a substantial amount of money, you're going to seek life in jail on those people? I don't think that's where we want to go. So I'm as I said earlier, listen, I think Murdaugh is a bad guy. I think what he did is horrible. I think he deserves life without parole for these things. I just don't know that I agree that we ought to start walking down a path of putting white-collar criminals in jail for the rest of their life because we can.
Do you have that in Florida, Tim?
No, we don't have that. Ours are violent crimes. We have prison reoffenders, 3 strikes. We got the minimum mandatories. We don't have any where you get 3 financial frauds where you get life. We don't have that.
This is
a disease.
Yeah,
Right.
This is a 3 strikes rule, but we had a recent case a couple of years back that said that they don't have to be prior convictions, and they can try you one at a time, and the new conviction counts as a prior offense. So even though you've got arrested on all charges, had no conviction, they can try 1, then 2, and then enhance you on the 3rd. That's a little. I'm not sure if the court really thought through the consequences of that, because financial crimes are considered serious and most serious crimes in our state.
Let me ask a dumb question here to Eric. Do you need this trial in order to recoup the money potentially for Gloria Satterfield's family? Because to me, as an outsider and a non-attorney, it seems like almost a moot point because this guy's never seen the light of day again. But why the necessity, I guess, in line with what Pete is asking for this financial trial?
Well, we've already recovered over $7.5 million for them, and we have a judgment against him that will collect some against what the receiver has recovered. But this is a criminal trial that the state will be putting on the docket, and he will face an additional sentence for this. And the reason that you do that is because, this arguably some would say wasn't a clean trial, that there was too much 404B stuff that came in. So if I'm the state, I'm belting suspenders, I'm putting duct tape all over this thing, and I'm wrapping it 6 ways in Sunday, that even if an appellate court was to reverse the murder charge, he's already convicted of the financial crimes. And don't forget, Pete is a former U.S. attorney. They're sitting there waiting, and they're going to be the backstop. If there's any problems on any of these state convictions or anything, the federal government's waiting there for wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, income tax evasion. And the reason that they haven't brought those federal charges is because Dick would have marched Alex down there the next day and said, I'll plead straight up to that because I want to go do my time at the Seymour Johnson Air Force Base camp instead of. Now he's at the big house, and he's at a place where there are some pretty tough, ornery people.
Yeah. Pete, what is, by the way, Adam's exploit? Smash the like button, followed here by Regina Owens. Love you guys. Pete, what is walk STS Nation through this appeals process? Now, Dick promised to appeal within 10 days. How does that play out, and what are the chances? It seems like Eric's statistics deem it to be a pretty low success rate for an appeal here.
Yeah, and in our state, you have to put the state on notice within 10 days of your intent to appeal. That's sort of stops the clock. The next step will be to get the transcript,
which is a long time.
That may take a year. It may take 18. It's a very, very slow process, and then briefing after that, and then scheduling. We're a couple years out before that appeal will be heard, and I agree politically that there's a very low likelihood that it will be reversed. I mean, he's had very good representation. Judge Newman enjoys an excellent reputation. I just don't see our Supreme Court reversing this case. And back to the fraud thing, I do think, and if I were the Attorney General at this time, I would prosecute him on a number of these fraud cases, and I would get him a bunch of consecutive time. I just don't know about the life without parole enhanced, so that's the only thing that gives me concern. But I'd make sure that he didn't get out of jail.
Well, let me ask you this, Pete. You know our Court of Appeals and our Supreme Court like I do. So Dick pushed this for an early trial, and he got it. He got what he wanted, which was going to catch the state off guard. They're not going to be able to prepare their case up, and it's not my burden to prepare the case, so I can put holes in their case, and it didn't work. So there were a lot of defendants, and you have them, Tim has them, that are sitting there waiting for their trials. They didn't get a speedy trial. Now that he lost, do you think the appellate courts are going to grab this case quickly and want to make a ruling on it, or is it going to simmer on low heat, and other cases that are before it are going to get heard, and this may be 2 years, 3 years in the normal course? What I'm asking you is, do you guys think that he's going to continue, or Dick is going to continue to be able to get special treatment and get that case pushed to the front of the line? I think not.
Back of the line.
Tim?
Yeah. There's no reason to rush it.
Yeah.
Kestrel writes, Eric, cups up, folks. Cup of Justice, Eric's podcast. Make sure you check it out. Tim, to you, just back to the Today Show jurors. Amy Williams said Alec Murdaugh did not help himself by testifying. And then they went on to say the key piece of evidence was a video taken from Paul's cell phone in the moments before the killings. That was according to Miss Generette. She went on to say, I think it probably would have been a hung jury had it not been for that video. It's like he spoke from the grave. Tim, how interesting is it to you to hear these remarks from jurors post conviction?
I think it's very common sense. I think any doubts they had would have been inflamed because you didn't have him at the scene. You don't have a murder weapon, no DNA, no gunshot residue. And could he have gone up to his mom? Sure. I don't know about the sleeping, these short naps, but I think if they didn't have that video, it could have been a hung jury. You could have had 2 or 3, maybe 4 that said, I can't convict somebody without putting him at the scene.
I don't think they would have brought charges. And if that phone wasn't cracked open in April of 2022, Pete, I don't believe that you as a U.S. attorney, or if you were an AG, I'm not sure you'd bring charges on a circumstantial evidence case if you can't put him at the scene at the time of death.
Yeah, I mean, SLED was waiting to get the OnStar data back from the FBI lab in Quantico, and they were waiting, hoping they'd be able to crack this phone. And I don't know if we've talked about it on this, but I mean, the way that thing happened is they had it set up on this algorithm that tried different combinations of codes. And after you try, depending on the phone setup, 20, then it shuts the phone down. And so it has to wait for 30 minutes, and it starts trying codes again. And somewhere somebody along the line said, have we tried his birthday? And they said, no, I don't think we have. And so just some intuition by an investigator, and they pulled it off the machine and put in his birthday. Damn if it didn't open it.
Wow. That's amazing. I did not know that. Regina Owens brings up a good point. I cried for all prayers for Alex Soul, RIP Maggie Paul. Justice was served, but still a sad day all around when you think of all the tragedy. Here's a question for all of you, and let's see. Susan Silver writes, since there's a panel of attorneys tonight, what is their take on talking head attorneys on TV, Tim, saying that the jury was wrong and the judge was biased? Your reaction to those comments?
I was watching some of these shows, and I don't want to name the shows, but these people on TV, and they're saying not guilty. And I'm like, who the hell are these people? Have they ever tried a case? Do they know what reasonable juries are looking at? This is not a law school exam. This is real people with real things. And I just couldn't believe. I lost a lot of credibility for a lot of these lawyers that were saying not guilty, or they'll never get a verdict. There's so much reasonable doubt.
I actually got in a fight Friday night.
And they argue, I'm sorry, they don't understand what circumstantial evidence is. You know, if you go back to the Innocence Project, all those death penalty cases were all overturned because of eyewitness testimony. So that wasn't circumstantial. That was weaker than circumstantial cases, because people, you know, ID and witness is really tough, especially when someone's pointing a gun at you. But circumstantial evidence cases can be very strong. And I had one with the FBI. And I don't think the legal shows did a service to the community by understanding that circumstantial evidence is just as strong as direct testimony.
I was on Chris Cuomo basically every night for 6 weeks. And there was an attorney, and I'm not going to name that attorney. I'm not going to say who it was. But there was an attorney who was not from South Carolina every night battling me. And then that attorney would go on Twitter and call me vulgar, ignorant, uninformed, lack of experience. Sure, I've only had one murder case and I lost, but criticizing my opinions on that, I thought the prosecutions was making a connection with the jury, and I was assessing by the day. And I predicted that I thought that there was going to be a hung jury, but that he was guilty. This person said absolutely not guilty, that actually tweeted there's more evidence against Bubba the dog to convict him of the murders than Alex. So Friday night we got on there, or Thursday night, and that person immediately started, the jury got it wrong. The jury didn't listen. Judge Newman was too pro-prosecution. The prosecutors violated rules of ethics, rules of the law, rules of evidence. Everybody got it wrong. And I'm telling you, I started yelling and saying, I'm tired of you denigrating South Carolina. You know, check your own state before you start denigrating our state.
Right.
It's ridiculous. The minute the jury came back, now all of a sudden it's the jury's fault.
Yeah. Sky Ricky writes, does it matter what the jurors say on TV? It seems that a few lawyers on YouTube are upset with the verdict, not me. The short answer is no, but it does or could impact the court of public opinion. This is a very tenuous line to toe here, people. I'm going to put this comment up. How likely is it, is Buster to be charged? From this question is being asked a lot. Can you respond to that? And then there is a little bit of news with Buster.
I don't have any reason to believe he's being charged anytime soon. They're obviously, I mean, the investigation. What's the young
Stephen Smith.
Man?
Stephen Smith.
Yeah, I mean, obviously his name is being mentioned in that, and I know that there is something they found during this investigation that is substantive in that investigation. I don't know what it is.
And we have had, and tomorrow night, once again, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Steve Peterson will be joining us. He is the private investigator and a former DEA agent for Stephen Smith's family. Right now, he says there's no reason to believe that Buster will be charged. But Buster is in the news because he did have to file a complaint on Sunday with the local sheriff's office where he lives. Says someone took pictures of him inside his Hilton Head condo. The report states Buster and his girlfriend reviewed doorbell cam video and noticed a suspicious car outside their condo. Buster believes the occupant of the vehicle took the photo based on Buster's position in the residence when the photo was captured. Eric, anything to say to STS Nation or the greater public about harassing members of the Murdaugh family post-conviction?
I think you got to leave them alone. I think they have been through a tremendous amount. Look, blood's thicker than water. I don't blame them for trying to stick together as a family. Buster is in the toughest, tightest spot of anybody I could ever imagine at 26 years old. You're talking about a kid that lost his mother and his brother. Now he's lost his father. Now his father is branded as a murderer. He has to get introspective with himself and say, did I miss some signals? You know, he didn't know that his father, according to the testimony, had lied to him for 2 years about being at the kennels. I'm pretty sure he didn't know about his father stealing $8 million from clients over 12 years. Yes, he probably knew about some of the drug usage of his father, but probably not to the extent that he did. And I think they have to be asking themselves some hard questions, because Alex changed his testimony not only on the kennel, but on did he check that the pulses of Maggie and Paul before the 911 call. Now he says he did it after. So he has to think about his life. You know, he can't maybe not carry that name. He may have to change his name. He may have to move. I mean, it's a horrible thing. He's got bright red hair. He's easily seen. Look, if I moved to Philadelphia, I look like every other Italian or Jewish kid in Philadelphia. Nobody's going to say, oh, there goes Eric Bland. But he's got a unique look, and I feel for the kid. Look, the one thing that, everything's in hindsight. Alex planned everything. Alex talked about his alibi, and, at 9 o'clock, I started making these calls, yada, yada. I think he made a mistake. If the police showed up and he was on the ground with either Paul or Maggie and hugging them, and he was full of blood, it may have been more actually credible than him showing up when the police did, Pete and Tim, totally clean. What are your thoughts on that? I think he thought to himself, well, if I got blood all over me, it's going to look like I did it. So I want to say I wasn't there and I was clean. What are your thoughts about that?
Oh, I think if he'd have said that, and I think if he'd have said, yeah, I was there for a minute before I went up to go to my mother's, and I came back and he's got blood all over him, I think he got a totally different possible charges on him or not. Because then you don't have him lying, because he says, yeah, I was there and then I left and I came back and he's hugging his kids. I mean, that's a different picture.
Pete?
Yeah, as I've been trying to think about this case and how I might do it differently, and the human factors involved in dealing with this jury. And you have to go back and think about his emotions in the courtroom. And of course, we had a bird's eye view with the camera on him all the time. And the jury was very close to him while he was testifying. And I keep asking myself, what's appropriate? If I were sitting at that table for 5 weeks and they started talking about a family member that died as violently as they did, how would I handle that? Would I cry? Would I put my hands in my face? If I did it this way, are people on TV going to say he's faking it? I mean, what's appropriate? And so I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how you coach that. I don't know how you're supposed to feel about it. I agree factually, Tim, that, if he was covered in blood and he was sitting there, holding his child or his wife or some combination of them and in pain when that officer got there, that certainly reads differently.
Well, I definitely think both of you would have done different than Dick and Jim on the allocution. You would have told your client, look, you don't have to admit to the murders, but you better show some contrition, some remorse, some grace, at least to tell the court and your family, I apologize for the lies that I told. I apologize to the police for lying about being at the kennel. I'm ashamed that I kept that information from my son, Buster. Some humility, some humanity. No, you don't have to. You could say, no, I did not kill my wife and my son. But to sit there when Judge Newman gave him 2 chances to give some humanity in his answers, explain your lies. And all he said is, I'm innocent. I did not kill my wife and child. It's like he was begging Newman, lock me away for life and no parole. I mean, what were your thoughts on that allocution, Tim?
I thought that he was, the lawyer in him was trying to preserve the appeal. Don't say something that can come back and haunt me. And he's never, ever going to admit to his son, Buster, that he killed these kids. That's probably all he's got left. He's got his brother.
But when you tell your client to show some contrition,
it made no difference at that point. He was convicted. He was going to get 30 years to life. He's going to get at least 60, right? 30 for the wife, 30 for that. And he's not going to survive anyway. So
what are your thoughts, Pete? What do you tell your clients in that situation?
I'll tell you this. I was thankful that he didn't have his son come up and beg for his dad.
Right.
I've seen that.
But what do you tell your clients in that situation? Do you say show some humanity, show a little bit of I didn't do right on some things. I didn't kill him, but I do admit that I didn't do right on some things. Maybe I'm wrong.
I was thinking, I agree with Tim. You weren't going. Judge Newman knew what he was going to do. I was thinking about, is there any way that he could have given some closure to his family and to his son with something he said up there in front of the judge? Because they walked out with him saying he's innocent. They don't have any closure.
Right.
There's so much pain now with all that. I mean, he has persecuted his son now who's alive.
And what about the fact that there were no victim impact statements at all? Because I thought maybe we would hear from Maggie's sister, but that didn't happen either.
Well, I'll tell you this. Judge Newman's pronouncement of his sentence was one of the most personal, eerie sentencing discourse I've ever heard, when he talked about, you've disgraced our profession. So he talked about being a lawyer. You've beat on sled for 6 weeks. You're going to have to look in your soul, and you're going to be haunted every night that you go to bed by your son and your wife, not in the way that you think that you'll have good thoughts about them. I mean, he called him a monster, and I've called Alex a modern day monster. He actually used the term monster, and he actually was positing, I wonder why they didn't ask for the death penalty in this case, because I have certainly put people to death for less. I mean, what were your thoughts, Pete? Have you ever heard a judge give it like that?
I've never seen anybody say that with the maturity and empathy and passion and careful words that Judge Newman gave it. It's like, you're sitting at the throne and you're hearing somebody really be thoughtful, no anger, no overt anger. I just thought, as we all have, that he's just been a prince up there.
Have you heard
he wasn't reading from any notes.
Have you heard that
All off the
before?
cuff.
Tim, have you ever heard a judge get that personal with it in a soft, low voice like that?
No, it was almost like I take it he's a very religious man, because it came off like a religious, you've done bad, you're going to have to pay now. You're going to have to, but he did it in a very polite, but, tough sentence. And he called him out like he was. He called him what he was, a monster.
And Tim's right. He did not use notes. When he said it may not have been you, I didn't know where he was going. And then he said,
I was wondering that too.
Yeah, it was the monster in you. And I mean, that was really, that was almost Shakespearean in nature there. But Pete, back to the victim impact statements. I thought maybe we would hear from Marion Proctor, Maggie's sister, but we didn't. Were you surprised?
Well, I was surprised that everybody agreed to a 9:30 sentencing the next morning.
Yeah.
Because we have a state constitutional amendment that gives victims the right to participate in any critical stage of a process, and obviously sentencing is part of that. So I assume the AG had already talked to all the victims of Eric Widobor about that and had their consent to go forward, and they didn't want to speak. And I was asked about that. Do you think the judge will let these victims, these financial victims, speak? I said,
I tried.
Would let
anyone
speak who wanted to speak, and this is in front of a judge, not in front of a jury, so he can decide what he wants to hear. It may have been kind of smart that you didn't have a lot of that testimony, so there's not another appealable issue that in the sentencing he was considering the financial crimes.
I tried. I talked with Creighton on Thursday night about that. My clients, the Plylers and the Satterfields, and Jordan Jenks and the father of Hakeem Pickney asked me to speak, and I said, "Look, I really want to speak." And they were not. There's a statute evidently that says it has to be based on the crime charge. You're a victim of the crime charged, and these were 404B charges that were brought in, but not the charges that he was convicted of. So he said, we can't do it. And I think you're right, Pete. You hit on something that he could have given his family some closure and said, I want you to go on your way. I want you to hold your head up high. You're good people. Instead, he gave them hope. And in fact, after the sentence, Dick and Jim gave a press conference, and he said the family believes today that he's more innocent than they believed he was yesterday. So all the lawyers managed to do was gin up his own family to continue to believe he's innocent.
Are they doing the appeal?
That's going to be, Pete would know more than that, but I'd be shocked.
I mean, they said the other day they are. I have no idea. That's I'd be surprised if those two stay in it. I mean, I think if you were advising Alec and his family, you'd say you'd want to get some effective outside counsel to take a look at this. Now, no disrespect to anybody. If I were defending him and we lost that thing, I'd probably advise them to get additional counsel to do this. I mean, I
don't see them trying the financial cases. Do you, Pete?
Have they filed appearance? I mean, they've represented.
Yeah. They entered.
I don't know. In South Carolina, it's really hard to get out of a case once you file an appearance.
In a criminal case, not in civil, but harder in criminal.
Case. Yeah. If you make what we call a general appearance in a case, do something beyond the bond hearing and the preliminary hearing, the practice in this state is your case. You're stuck whether you get paid or not. You can petition for fees, but it's the statutory $50 an hour, $70 an hour thing. So I would say they're in this case. And they're not going to try these cases. I mean, they don't have a defense. I mean, Dick admitted in the call from the hospital that he committed the crimes or committed the thefts, and he admitted them on the stand. There's no way to defend them. I mean, it may be a 2-day guilty plea, but it's there's no merit to any defense.
Joel, one of the things in our state is that everybody said, well, why didn't they seek the death penalty? Yep. Pete will tell you that, and Tim will, that it invokes so many different prophylactic protections for a defendant. The state has to fund a lot of the case. There's hearing after hearing. There's getting a death penalty qualified jury. There's post-death repercussions. I think the state made a good decision. One, I just don't think you could do it in a circumstantial evidence case, but I think they made the smart decision. Don't you, Pete?
I do, but you have to ask the question, if it would have been an African-American man whose family wasn't political and they killed two people like that, would they be facing the death penalty? And the answer is probably yes, unfortunately.
And by the way, I was going to get to that. The USA Today, it's worth everyone taking a look at. You can Google escaping the death penalty. They did a column today on this and asked the question, why did Alec Murdaugh escape the death penalty? And the answer is perhaps it's because he's white and rich. The Murdaugh case is the latest reminder that death row is not a high-income neighborhood. A look at the 35 people. Yeah, look at the 35 people on South Carolina's death row drives home the point. According to the Department of Corrections, 17 of the 35 are Black and grew up mostly in poverty. And Judge Clifton Newman even said in his resounding statement, referring to the Murdaughs as a respected family who has controlled justice in this community for over a century, and that they themselves, the Murdaugh family, sought the death penalty against more than 30 defendants during their 86-year reign. Final comment from Judge Newman here. He said, as I sit here in this courtroom and look around at the many portraits of judges and other court officials and reflect on the fact that over the past century, your family, including you, have been prosecuting people here in this courtroom, and many have received the death penalty, probably for lesser conduct. This is probably a topic for a whole other show, which I'm going to try to do. But it's a sad day in America when the answer is because he's probably white and rich.
Tim,
I disagree with that.
Tim, what do you have to do to do a death penalty?
Argument. I'm sorry?
What do you have to do if they were to do the death penalty? How would it have changed everything for this case?
I think that Pete's correct. They knew they had a weak circumstantial evidence case. You got to get a death qualified jury. And then they might have been afraid, well, this weak a case, they may not in the back of their minds find guilty because they know that death penalty is hanging out there, and it might hurt the state since they didn't have confession and blood and all that. So I think they also thought, okay, we got two murders. We convict him. He's going to get at least 60 years. He's 58. He's not going to survive. Why go through that whole rigmarole? Why spend all that money? Let's just go with the life sentence. And we got the financials to back it up, those crimes. We don't need to do all this. And I think it's a spurious argument in this case. And
Tim, you disagree with this USA Today column that
I do.
You do? How come?
I disagree that he didn't get the death penalty because he's rich and white. I think if they would have had evidence that physically put him there, had
they would have gotten
it. DNA or an eyewitness, they would have had the death penalty.
I agree with that too. If they had a stronger case,
I do, Tim. I agree.
Yeah.
And then
I don't think it was based on. I think he was fortunate that they didn't have that evidence. But if they had it, they were going to go after him with it.
Oh, absolutely.
And then there are the reminders of the inanities of this trial. Miss Z writes, can't get over the 5'2" vigilantes. I mean, this trial had it all, Eric. We had COVID, we had bomb threats, we had jury tampering. Have you ever seen so much of so many outside factors playing into one singular trial?
You know, it's clearly a circus. I think one thing worth mentioning, though, is where is he now and what kind of facility is he going to be in? And I'm going to tell you, it's one of the worst places on this side of security facilities in South Carolina. You know, he probably had a hot dog and a piece of white loaf bread for dinner tonight about 5 o'clock. That's probably the same thing he had last night for dinner. He didn't have much different for lunch. You they got to figure out where they're going to place him. Keep in mind, his father and grandfather put
Correct.
a lot of people in prison. A lot of people in prison for life for 30 years plus. So there's security issues with where he'll be placed. And there are gangs in these prisons. I mean, this is not, you would not wish your worst enemy to be in one of the facilities he's going to be in. So it's his life is not going to be good.
Do you guys see him being a jailhouse lawyer for a lot of people if he somehow can navigate to the point that he doesn't have to look over his shoulder every 5 minutes?
If he wants to stay alive, I think he better either put some money in someone's commissary or pay some family on the outside, or he better be doing legal work.
Yeah.
Because I think he's as open for a target as anybody in there.
Yeah. Bogart writes, Eric, did Alex give Jim the outline for the closing?
No, I think Jim Griffin is better than that. Jim would say, I'm sorry if you want me to do the closing. Do you agree, Pete?
Yeah. I mean, I think Jim had kept a running list of reasonable doubts, points that he wanted to make. A lot of them he had before, because you remember his motion for directed verdict, he went through a pretty comprehensive list at that point.
Good point.
And I think he, brushed that up. And again, just thinking back again through the trial and now through this conversation we've had, Dick never caught on. He never got his footing in that trial. He got off to a bad start and, used the thoroughbred if you want to. I mean, it didn't happen for him. And that it just kind of faded. And the case, Jim picked it up and did the technical work, but they didn't get the benefit of the show horse. Dick would say that the judge didn't like him and cut him off at his knees. Maybe some truth to that, but
I think they also underutilized Maggie Fox, who I know very well, who is a competent female attorney. She only got 2 witnesses. I went on a national TV show and my podcast like the night before she got those 2 witnesses and said, this is incredible. They got a real good seasoned lawyer. They have a female lawyer there. They need a new voice and she can do it. I think if they utilized her more, she could have, made a connection to the jury. Dick didn't, and Jim was exhausted.
Yeah.
But Pete, back to what you were just saying, and to use a sports reference, how does Dick Harpootlian not show up to the biggest game of his life, with his A game?
I don't know. It just didn't happen. I'm sure he thought he was ready, but it just didn't come together.
Tim, is it harder when you are doing a case with another person and it's not a co-defendant case? And I don't know if you've ever done that, where it would be 2 thoroughbreds like you and Pete at the table with differing personalities and differing styles representing the same person. So you're constantly having battles on who's going to do the direct of this witness, who's going to do the cross. And as the trial goes on, one guy has to say to the other guy, look, I don't know if you're making the connection like you should, or the client's picking one of you over the other. Pete, have you had that situation where it was?
And I think Jim and Dick have a very good working relationship, and Jim defers to Dick for, the media and being the show horse in the case. And that's the way, and he was the workhorse. And that's the way they've always operated. And so I don't see dissension with them. Probably Alec or somebody else in the family on Alec's behalf got involved and said, we want to change the way we're operating this case a little bit. We want y'all to switch things up.
Have you ever done that, Tim?
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned, I just had a federal public corruption RICO trial, and I had my old boss who's now prosecuting, defending in The Hague now, very experienced, more experienced than I am. And we tried the case together. I did the opening. I called the defendant. I had my client on the stand for like 3 days. I did a 2.5-hour opening. And there were points where my co-counsel really pissed the judge off. I mean, pissed him off so badly that the client was like, don't want him talking in front of the judge. And they went at it. I mean, and it's a federal judge, a senior federal judge, and you don't do that. And they really went at it, and I had to pick up some slack and do some other things in front of the judge, but it made it uncomfortable for me and my co-counsel. And it's the dynamics, it really is, because we were friends, not personal friends, but we've known each other for 30 years, but working together. And I did the defendant, and that time we put the defendant on last. And I was asked to do the closing, and I had to, in order to tell my client, I said, listen, I'm not prepared. I'm completely wiped. I'm tired. I just had to do direct and cross for 3 days. I said, I'd rather have him do the closing. And I deferred for the best interest of the client, because when you're on the stand or you're standing up doing direct and closing for 3 straight days, you are worn out, completely worn out. And we introduced 1,200 exhibits.
Wow.
And so I had to defer, and he did a fine closing. We won the RICO conviction. So it does happen. And the clients do then turn to other lawyers on the team if something goes good for one lawyer and bad for another. So that does happen internally.
Pete, what is your opinion on, did Dick go too far on Ronnie Crosby, our friend? And he obviously knew Ronnie for a long time. And Ronnie's a well-respected products liability lawyer in our state, probably one of the top 5 best. When he cross-examined him and said, you have an axe to grind with Alex. He stole money from you. You had to reach into your pocket and pay it. So you're coming in here to kill Caesar, so to speak. And it got very heated. And Ronnie Crosby said, look, no question I had anger, but you can't walk through life with anger. And I had to check it and put it aside. How did that play in front of the jury, Pete?
I thought that he went too far. I mean, I get you trying to show the jury there's some bias to the testimony and you're trying to make that point. But again, we know all these people. I'm friends with Ronnie Crosby. I'm friends with Dick Harpilly, and I'm friends with Judge Newman. It felt like it went too far to me. It did.
Yeah.
Please hit the like button if you guys have not. C-Star writes, Jim didn't believe his own words, in my opinion. Here, memories are long post-trial. Lauren R. writes, wonder if Poot is still so honored, more like ashamed. Pete, I was interested to get your take on this. There was also a New York Times opinion piece today. And some people may like the Times, others may hate it, but they are still among the most widely read media publications. And the title of the opinion piece was Why Alec Murdaugh's Quick Conviction Worries Me. And it's written by a guy named Farhad Manju, who writes, really, I can see how some of these details can paint a pretty damning picture when put together on a neat timeline, but I expected the jury to spend some time pondering the perfectly innocuous explanations for many of them, and then went on to say, Alex Murdaugh was speeding away from his house to flee the crime scene. Why did he drive at more than 80 miles per hour on the way back from his mother's house? Could it be that he just had a heavy foot? Someone else asked, is there any sort of requirement in terms of reviewing the evidence for the jurors?
No.
Is there? There's not. Okay.
And we actually have a case that you can invade the jury room.
Right.
Okay.
Let me tell you why it doesn't bother me. Because if there's anybody who's ever had a jury of his peers, it's Alec Murdaugh. This was in his literal backyard, a small community where his family has been known and loved and respected as leaders in that community for 100 years. And if the case would have gotten moved to BFE, where he didn't know a soul and the jury was out for an hour, then I may have some hesitation about this. But he had a jury of his peers and his choosing, and that's the fairest jury that Alec Murdaugh would have ever gotten.
If you remember O.J. Simpson, if they'd have tried him in Brentwood, we probably have a different verdict. The state attorney decided to put it in L.A., which was more of his peers, or so-called peers, and that's how he got the not guilty.
Susan writes, I missed a live episode again. No, you didn't, Susan, because we're still live. STS absolutely has the most worthy guests and greatest programs. Look forward to each new episode. Y'all have been my entire Murdaugh education. Cup of Justice ain't bad. Cup of Justice ain't bad. But we're also, check out survivingthesurvivor.com. We're also putting together a little merchandise store that my chief marketing officer, my wife, is building. So that's coming to us soon. John Monk, who covered this case, kudos to the media. As a former media guy, I thought they did a fantastic job. And shout out to William Austin, a new member. We love new members here. John Monk tweeted this out, Pete, and I'd love for you to speak to this. Little known Murdaugh fact. The jurors were paid $20 a day for service. Trial and jury selection went 28 days for a grand total of $560. Not much for a huge contribution to justice. It is a very thankless job.
Disgrace.
Yeah, Pete. What would you like to say about the way the jurors handled themselves and came to this final verdict?
It's overused. People who live paycheck to paycheck. Mm-hmm. People in this community, these are hardworking people that live paycheck to paycheck. I would suspect most of the people in this jury are hourly, and they didn't get paid by their employer while they sat there. So this was a huge sacrifice to them. And, I wish they paid jurors a fair wage. They should. Because this has been a life-changing experience for them in a number of ways, including many of them financially.
Yeah. The man with that beautiful mahogany behind him is famed Tallahassee defense attorney R. Timothy Jansen, one of the best. I love when he switches into character and starts asking questions on the fly. He is a partner in the firm that bears the name Jansen and Davis. He also spent 5 years as a federal prosecutor, savvy as they come. Tim, I think I asked this on Saturday, but I'll ask it of you again. It's a sad story. Tragic story all around. What's a positive takeaway from this trial?
Well, I keep thinking that, we all talk about the perfect crime. Sometimes I watch these shows, FBI forensics, and it's like the perfect crime until someone grabs some piece of evidence, some scientific evidence, a fingerprint or something, and they solve the whole case. And in this case, it was one little piece of evidence that SLED didn't have anything to do with, that Alex didn't think about, that they didn't even have apparently for over a year before they charged it, but turned out being the vital piece of evidence that the jury hung to, that they had this piece of evidence, they considered it credible, they utilized that in making a verdict. And I think they did a good job. And I think even though the juror was out 3 hours, but they said after 45 minutes, they were pretty in the jury room for 3 hours. And there's no law that requires them to go over all the evidence. I mean, they sat there and saw all the evidence in the courtroom. They heard the arguments of counsel. Now, they can take a vote. They can take a vote and they all say guilty. They can come back right then and there. There's no rule set time. But I think a lot of people who are not lawyers, talking heads on TV, people in law enforcement, got a lesson, learned a little bit about the law, learned about evidence, how it's collected, and unfortunately, I think some criminals might learn some things too, how to evade evidence, how to evade things. You're learning little secrets about what the car can do, what that phone can do up the towers. We see it every day because we deal with it every day. Because our client says, I wasn't there. Yeah, you weren't there? Well, your phone was right there. And so a lot of times I get people come to me and they said, hey, and they tell me a story. And I say, okay, if you think I believe that story, why would you want me to be your lawyer? And it's my way of telling them, don't feed me BS because I've been doing it too long. And Pete and Eric, when BS comes across that table, you can look at it and say, man, this is horrible. I can't try this case. I don't want to represent these people. I'm not going to insult them. But I think the good news is that more people saw the legal system in a criminal case. It's not like on TV. You don't always get that DNA. You don't always get that blood. You don't have that. And you have to rely on something put that puzzle together for a jury to decide, and they did. And that's what I'm proud of.
Got greetings from Ireland. Hello from Spain by Blizzard Down and Kate Mann. Hello from England. A lot of people upset that Eric Bland didn't have that ring light on so they could see that handsome face of his, but we'll fix it for the next time. But Eric Bland was selected for inclusion in the South Carolina super lawyers every year that you can count since the beginning of time. He is a super lawyer in professional liability, one of the two in the entire state of South Carolina with that honor. He represents Gloria Satterfield's family, getting her family justice, and he's also host of Cup of Justice. Eric, what's your positive takeaway from all of this?
One, first, I could sit here and talk to you three guys, for hours on end. If you put a bourbon in front of me, this could be a 4-hour podcast. I mean, I'm just, fascinated to listen to Pete with his knowledge, and Tim is just really spot on, and you are as well. It's good. My positive take is a little bit what Pete and Tim said. One, as a South Carolinian, I'm so proud of the way our state has handled this for the last 2 years on Alex Murdaugh. He's drinking from the same cup of justice that everybody drinks from. I thought Judge Newman just was the star of the show. I thought Justice was the real star of the show, and Justice won. He got a fair trial. There's no question that he got to put on what he wanted. He chose to do a defense case. Pete wouldn't have done it. And I think this was a learning moment for the whole world, really, to see a criminal trial. We saw OJ together. All of us saw OJ, and it was a mess. Judge Ito became the show, and, just the lawyers and everybody was trying to make a cottage industry of it. That didn't exist here. What you saw was the law, and it's pretty at times, it's ugly at times, but we have the best system in the world. There's no doubt in my mind. This is no kangaroo court like you see in Iran where somebody's charged yesterday and they put them on trial today. The United States of America is the beacon for justice in our world and how it's dispensed. And I mean, it was a thing of beauty.
Natalia says hello from Canada, and Typhoon writes, this case was a slam dunk. Pete Strom is a managing partner at Strom Law Firm. He's a native of Columbia, South Carolina. He was the youngest U.S. attorney in the great land of ours when he was named U.S. attorney back in 93. He's also one of the top criminal defense attorneys, not just in South Carolina, but in all the land. Pete, what your positive takeaway is, and also, can you address this? Is there ever a slam dunk case? You got to come prepared, right?
You got to come prepared. So I end where Eric started. Judge Newman is America's judge, and I think that he set the tone for this trial, and he managed it with such self-control and the perfect tone. I think what Tim said is America got to watch a trial. It didn't fit perfectly into 50 minutes. That was, and cross-examination with a confession at the end. But the country got to see how a trial really works. And it's not perfect. And lawyers ask more questions than they should. And they don't have them framed perfectly because you're there for 5 weeks and you're up at night and you're trying to react to what the other side's saying. But I think our country now understands how the criminal process works. And I think the majority of them think the jury got it right, the large majority. And I agree with that. And I'm proud to be a part of the system.
And I'm proud to have you three guys on. This is a first for STS Nation. Layla, 2 a.m. here in Mogadishu, Somalia. Very smart people on the panel. Wow. Shout out to Somalia. We are, in fact, a global program. Quick programming note. We'll be back tomorrow night with a live show, 7 p.m. Eastern time, with Amy Lawrence Lovely, Amy Zimmercheck, who is Cousin Eddie's attorney. Pete Stevenson will be here as well. I'm sorry, Steve Peterson. I said it backwards there. He is the attorney for Stephen Smith. And And so it should be
He
a
is.
fantastic show.
I mean, he's the
not investigator.
He's investigator.
I'm hungover from this Murdaugh trial. The investigator and Lonnie Coombs as well will be joining us. So that is live show for tomorrow night. We're also bringing in 3 ex-cons, one who served hard time for murder, 2 others who served hard time as well. They're going to talk to you what it's like inside the big house for Alec Murdaugh, and it ain't fun. I'll tell you that. We're going to have them on this week. I'll let you know when. And then Friday is a live show with Detective Phil Waters, who's investigated over 400 homicides. Wishing you all a very happy week. Love you, America. Love you, Somalia. Love you, Canada. Love you, England. Love you, Ireland. The list goes on.